hours ago.
It is a pulsing white light that illuminates the forest, and if that wasn't the light they saw, then what they're saying is that within their line of vision there were two pulsing white lights illuminating the forest.
And there it was, in the direction that the airmen saw their flashing light, flashing at the same rate as the airmen saw their flashing light, which is once every 5 seconds. And as you move, the lighthouse appears to move between the trees, always keeping low, appearing to be just a few feet above the ground, appearing to be very much closer than it actually is.
I don't want to talk to people who tell me I was looking at the lighthouse. I could see the lighthouse. I knew where the lighthouse was. It's ludicrous.
But as well as the lighthouse, other potential explanations were beginning to emerge.
We know that at the time that happened, a bright meteor was seen burning up over southern England, and bright meteors very often give the impression of something falling quite nearby, even though they're actually very high up in the atmosphere.
There was also talk of a Russian satellite burning up on re-entry, and even lights on a farmer's tractor.
They weren't there that night. I certainly wish some of them had been. They might have had a different opinion of things. But they're entitled to their opinion. They certainly are. I know what happened. I was there.
Much of the strength of the case rests on authoritative first-hand evidence from men with impeccable credentials. But skeptics suggest that even this testimony might be fallible.
We're just beginning to realise just how unreliable eyewitness testimony can be. We had a situation where things were happening under very poor observational conditions. It was night time. We had people who were in a state of heightened arousal. They were very excited. They were very unsure of what was actually happening. And they had no framework to make sense of this. Lots of unexpected, strange things were happening.
There's no doubt about it. This is weird.
On this particular night, they were almost like in this UFO state of mind. Therefore, all these mundane things that would otherwise have been ignored suddenly become unusual.
Amongst a flurry of theories, the believers pointed to an important unanswered question. If the solution was so mundane, why was the Ministry of Defence being so secretive? What were they hiding?
I think they're withholding information because they didn't make a public announcement about it and say something very unusual has happened in our country. We don't know what it is. The story came out little by little, almost by default. It didn't come out from the Ministry of Defence. And if they weren't hiding something, they would have themselves, in my opinion, have made it public.
You discover this in a sort of furtive way. You think they've been trying to hush this up. And if they've just been trying to hush this up, they've probably been trying to hush up a lot more that they know. And then we become very curious. We want to know what really went on. And we're not going to be fobbed off by little excuses.
The sense of conspiracy was made worse by the MOD's inherent culture of secrecy.
At the time the Cold War was in full swing, secrecy has always been a rather paranoid matter in the Ministry of Defence, not among military officers, but among the civil servants and some of the scientists.
What this shows about Britain's tendency to be overly secretive about everything is that whilst you can sometimes justify it for reasons of national security, often it's done for no good reason at all, and it can create more problems than it ever solves.
Because of documents released in 2002, it's only now that we know how the MOD responded to Holt's memo. As with other UFO reports, cursory attempts were made to come to a rational explanation.
During my tour of duty, I received between 250 and 300 UFO reports each year. Of those, 25 or 30 remained completely unexplained. It's very difficult for the Ministry of Defence to actually really resolve the UFO issue, because when you have a UFO sighting that's been investigated but remains unexplained despite best efforts, you know, what is there to do?
There's nothing in the paper trail to suggest that anything happened outside of a few letters being shuffled from one department to another, and I'm deciding this is something we don't want to get involved in, it could bring lots of unwelcome publicity, let's forget about it, let's sit on it. And that's precisely what they did. And that policy was successful for 2 years, because they didn't get any unwelcome publicity until the News of the World decided to splash it on page 1.
Historically, the Ministry of Defence has certainly not covered up, but certainly downplayed the subject. And, you know, given the excitability of some of the people in the UFO lobby, I think that's quite understandable.
The MOD's remit is not to solve UFO mysteries, but to determine whether there is a defence threat.
My brief was to look for evidence of a threat to the defence of the UK. Unless something actually opens fire on you, there is no direct evidence of a threat. However, just because it doesn't mean that everything in the garden is rosy.
Not all those in the defence establishment felt that the Rendlesham incident was without defence implications.
Either something physical, solid, penetrated British airspace without let or hindrance by our defences, landed on a United States Air Force base leased from us in East Anglia, or it didn't. And the deputy commander of this base and several hundred of his enlisted soldiers were hallucinating. And if indeed the deputy commander of a United States Air Force base in Britain and several hundred of his people are hallucinating, that itself must be of defence interest, and it simply will not do to say otherwise.
The recent release of the Rendlesham files point to bureaucratic inertia rather than cover-up. But this is far from the end of the story for the UFO community.
People say, with the release of the MOD documents, that's it. Rendlesham case closed. I would say, hang on. We've only got to the sort of middle chapter pages here. And when they say, well, why? Well, where's the American documentation? What does that tell us?
There are cells in our government and most governments that know what's going on, and for reasons best known to themselves, they are keeping it dark.
There will always be accusations that information is being withheld, and that when material is handed over, people, because they don't find in it what they want to find in it, will then say, oh well, you know, there's got to be more top secret files. So when they're released and there's still nothing in there, you know, it's almost like you cannot get to the bottom of it. It's a hall of mirrors.
It's also kind of rich and so contradictory and so complicated that this is kind of ideal fodder for myth-making.
It's almost like Fox, Mulder and Scully and the X-Files. It's like there is always this ambiguity at the end, because you can never put a solution on the mystery. There's always that question mark at the end. Nobody's prepared to say, oh, well, that solves that. Because by solving it, you kill the mystery.
The Rendlesham story continues to fascinate and perplex. Over 20 years, it's evolved into a classic of its kind, a modern myth.
All this UFO mythology, it's people's yearning that we're seeing, that they want there to be something else. It channels people's fears and hopes for the future. It allows people to consider greater questions about our place in the universe.
It is literally life-changing. I wouldn't knock having that kind of feeling, because it makes us all better people. It makes us respect life and the values that we should all really aspire to.